If you think about what we're doing in this reading, we're managing risk. And the risk is primarily interest rate risk, equity risk. Interest rate risk is the fear is that you have rising interest rates. And the linkage is then you have falling bond prices. Now, falling bond prices may not sound like it's that big a deal. And remember, as interest rates rise, bond prices fall, but not as much as when bond prices go up when yields drop. And that's part of convexity. There's just that lower bit that when interest rates start to rise, the bond prices come down, but they don't go to the bottom of the basement. They come down, but not as bad. But how can we manage the risk of a rising interest rate environment? Because one of the areas that you really want to focus in on is the institutional investor. If you're a pension fund and you've had a surplus and all of a sudden interest rates start to rise and you've got a predominance of bonds in the portfolio to match up with your multiple liabilities, having a rise in interest rate environment could shrink the market value of your bonds to where they no longer cover the present value of the liabilities. And then when that happens, then you got to put the PBO, the projected benefit obligation, on your balance sheet. That's not great. You now got more debt on the balance sheet. So a lot of times pensions, and we're going to see this in the 4 fixed income readings, intro, liability driven, right in the middle of the liability driven reading, you're going to see an example of an institutional pension account using swaps to manage the risk that's going on in the portfolio. So again, we've got these cross currents between the readings that sometimes having the fundamentals down first can be really helpful. So if we have a rising interest rate environment, the impact to a portfolio is that generally leads to falling bond prices. Now, one way to manage that risk is to enter into a swap. Now, just like in futures contracts, if I sell a futures, I lower the duration of the portfolio. And duration is going to be the way of saying if rates rise, how can I mitigate that decrease in price on the bond? And by shortening the duration, because remember, the change in the bond price equals the negative modified duration times the change in yields. So if you have a change in yields, let's just say it's 100 basis points, and you've got a modified duration that's like 8, 7, 6, however big that duration number is, a negative times that change in yields is going to have a big impact on the change in bond price. So if you can bring down that duration from 9, 8, 7, 6 down to 2, 1, then that 1 times the change in yields will have a much smaller impact on the change in the bond price. So shorting futures or entering into a swap. But the question is, what kind of swap do we need to get into? Now, I want you to be thinking about signs, what I get, and what I pay. So when I have a rising interest rate environment and falling bond prices, I want to reduce the duration of my portfolio. And in doing that with a swap, I want to pay fixed and receive floating. So let me describe why. So when I have 2 legs of a swap, a fixed leg and a floating rate leg. Let's talk about the fixed leg. A fixed leg and a swap, there's a heuristic or a rule of thumb that's not in the reading, but it's going to kind of help you. It used to be in the old CFA Level 3 fixed income, but it was kind of removed, but I thought it was kind of helpful. The fixed rate leg has a tenor. Let's just assume the tenor is for 4 years. So you pay fixed for 4 years. If you take the tenor, the 4-year number, and multiply it by 75%, that becomes the duration of the fixed rate leg. Now, what about the floating rate leg? The floating rate leg usually could be a semi-annual payment of floating rates. It resets every 6 months. Now, the heuristic or the rule of thumb on the floating rate leg, it's the midpoint or 50% of its floating leg reset. So for instance, if I have a semi-annual floating rate, then the duration of that semi-annual floating rate is 0.25 because it's half of semi-annual or 6 months. So with that in mind, if I have a pay fixed, 75% of a 4-year float or tenor is a -3 because I'm paying out that fixed rate leg. And if I'm receiving floating, then that floating, if it's a semi-annual reset, its duration is 0.25 positive because I'm receiving it. It's a positive into me. I pay out the -3 duration. So I have a -3 plus the 0.25. It ends up giving me a -2.75 duration. That's how you calculate the duration of a swap. Now, what can they do on the exam? They have done this twice in the past in an essay question. They gave you 3 different swaps. Pay fixed, receive floating, pay floating, receive fixed, different tenors, different resets. Choice A, B, and C. And then you had to determine, based on the current portfolio, the interest rate environment, select A, B, or C, calculate the duration of the swap, and then justify the choice based on the objective of the portfolio manager. So let's just say, for instance, I have a portfolio manager that has a duration of a 4 duration on my fixed income portfolio as a pension. I anticipate interest rates are going to be going up. My objective is to drop that to about a 1 duration. Given the example that I just did, pay fixed, receive floating on a 4-year semi-annual swap, when I combine my portfolio of 4 with a -2.75, I come close to a positive 1.25 duration once I combine the portfolio duration of 4, the swap duration of a -2.75, combined together to be one portfolio gets me to a positive 1.25.